Hello, uh, welcome everyone. Good morning or evening, depending on where you are. Um, yeah, we're going to be going over the Obot AI online workshop for bringing order to your MCP catalog in an enterprise setting. I'm Bill Maxwell. I'm a software architect over here at Obot, and I'm joined by Connie Lin. Yeah, and today we'll just be doing our workshop and going through how to use MCPs and the best ways to bring those into the enterprise. You can take a look at our docs at any time to see how to deploy or set up your own OBOT instance. And we will be recording the session.
All right, so we have some upcoming events to share with you all. If you haven't heard us talk about the MCP Developer Summit yet, we are hosting one in London next month, October 2nd. So if you can join us, we'd love to have you there. You can register at our website, mcpdevsummit.ai. The full confirmed agenda is live. You can go take a look at all the sessions, our speakers, and all the sponsors that you can chat with while you are in London. Also, another MCP community event that we are involved with is the Context live stream. We stream every Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and it features, every week we have one or two speakers that talk about a new MCP software, updates in the MCP space, all that good stuff. So check us out on YouTube to tune in. Thanks, Bill.
Yeah, so today, if you do have any questions or anything that you want to ask us, go ahead and put that into chat, and Connie will be helping. We'll take time throughout the presentation to answer those.
Yeah, hey, Bill, real quick, we actually do have a raised hand, so I wanted to see if Adrian, you have a question here? Oh, no? Okay, no worries, we can continue.
All right. But yeah, at any time, put them in, and we'll have some breaks throughout, and we'll answer those questions. So yeah. So first, we're just going to do just a quick poll to kind of see where everyone's at in their MCP understanding and how they're used. We'll go over the basics of how to use MCP. We'll do some demos and cover what it takes to bring it into the enterprise and some best practice architecture. And then we'll walk through our OBOT gateway to take a look at what that all ends up looking like. So real quick, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to share a quick poll and yeah. Just give you a few minutes to answer this. Just give you another maybe 20 seconds or so. And cool. So it looks like we've got, we'll end that now. Thank you for filling that out. It looks like we've got a range of understanding, so we'll go over everything. So let's start with the basics of MCP. And so just at a high level, the model context protocol is, think of it like the USB port of being able to connect your models, your LLMs to other APIs, services, and data. And it's just a universal way that everyone's agreeing to be able to say, this is how you do it. So you don't have to build these tools, per provider or per every time you want to swap out a model. So it's very beneficial and really taking off within the community. And it's got a few different components. And so the main thing is you've got your MCP host, and that is an LLM app. So think VS Code, Copilot, Claude Desktop, one of those types of services. And so then you've got clients within that host, that application that is going to connect to different MCP servers, which are basically the endpoints that are serving up that data and hosting those tools and those API endpoints. And so this is important. I think OpenAI came out with kind of tool calling, and so there was a lot of different implementations. And so Anthropic about a year ago now came up with this model, the MCP protocol, and they open sourced it. So it's been community driven. And then all of the main model providers and a lot of the clients are all adopting the standard. It's simplified the development and the tools for being able to build your own servers. And so it's just got a lot of tooling to make that easier. And then the ecosystems really picked up as well. So a lot of large SaaS providers and applications that you already use are adopting, and there's building first-party MCP servers. So they're building first-class support into their products, and then which gives us another way to interact with those through our AI applications. And so through this, the protocol is standardizing to make it simpler so that it's handling a lot of the scaffolding and tough parts around, how do you authenticate to these services and these servers. They've embraced OAuth, and when you have these servers, how do you interact with them? How do you even communicate with it? And so they have this pre-canned templates that allow you to prompt the model in such a way that it should interact with this MCP server the way it was intended, and the tools, which are ultimately what ends up getting data, fetching information, or interacting with another system. Those APIs, those tools are all standardized and easy to spelled out for what those need to look like. And then being able to get content back to the user, anything from, a web page and, the content or the records or, the information that you're looking after. There's some really cool projects that are doing like the MCP UI capabilities, so that actually return back UI widgets that can be displayed depending on the client. And so it's really interesting and super powerful what the capabilities are. And then they're also standardizing things like sampling, which is if you have a MCP server that gets a bunch of information and then wants to summarize it, it can ask the client to pass that to the model and then give that back to the end user. It can prompt users to confirm things like, should I delete this record or not? And they're continuing to evolve the specification. I imagine there's a new draft probably coming out pretty quick here. They're moving very, very fast. And so most recently, I think just this week, they announced sort of their registry stuff. So I think they put out a blog post around that and standardizing what an MCP server index could look like. And so let's unpack a little bit about what the MCP architecture looks like. So when you actually implement one of these servers and when you have a client actually interacting with it, there's two main protocols. You'll sometimes see a third, but primarily there's standard I/O communications, which is designed to run locally on the host's like laptop or computer, and it expects to be able to just interact with it, execute the command, and interact with it locally. Then there's streamable HTTP, which is a remote server and allows you to interact with it over the web using standard technologies. Initially, they had gone with SSE, but that's been deprecated in favor of streamable HTTP. but you might still see a few servers that haven't updated yet. But for the most part, that capability has been moved over in favor of streamable HTTP. And so the big piece that it's really tackling all the hard problems on is in the authorization bits. And so they've standardized on OAuth and being able to use that as a protocol for handling all of the authentication and authorization within systems. And so the challenge is, you've got a lot of AI clients, and in theory, we're going to have a lot of AI agents that are going to be using these MCP servers, and they're going to be, largely, decoupled. You don't know, who's going to hit it when. And so being able to leverage a standard spec that's been in place for, um, a long time, but the MCP spec is actually pushing, I think, a lot of the OAuth spec forward, embracing things that I don't think were fully embraced beforehand, particularly like dynamic client registration, where basically your servers are able to dynamically connect and become a resource in the OAuth flow so that it can actually issue tokens and connect to the upstreams. So but this is an important part of the spec that's still evolving to cover areas like, agent to services, agent to MCP server, where there isn't a person in the loop necessarily to do the OAuth flow. So it's continuing to evolve there. I don't think it's fully spec'd out just yet. But let's just kind of take a look at MCP servers and just kind of see, what they're all about. So to do this first part of the demo, I'm going to use Goose. This is put out by a client put out by Block. It's really cool. You run it locally on your laptop. It's open source, and so it's a good tool to use with MCP servers. So this is the Goose UI here. If you haven't used it before, Goose calls their MCP server integration extensions. And so when you come and you want to add an extension to Goose, you click here and you give it a name. You pick the different protocol or the protocol that you intend to use for that server, and then you put the command to run that server. And so typically this is all found on the MCP servers like README or in the catalog or index that you find, usually tells you how to execute this. And so that's where you get all of these values. I've pre-configured a couple. Let's take a look. I'm going to use DuckDuckGo. So this is the standard IO. It uses UVX to run the server. And so this brings the ability to do search. And then there's also some, for instance, this is the everything MCP server, which is used for, when you're doing client development. This has a little bit of everything that an MCP server can do. So you can test your client out with some of the functionality, like is it supporting prompts or resources, tool calling, all of that. It's just available here. Again, this is another standard IO, and this one's using NPX, so it's probably written in TypeScript. And so, yeah. So here, now that I've got those enabled, I can, tell it to search for the latest news on open, say, model context protocol, and summarize changes. So here, this is just kind of your standard chat client, but it will think about it. I'm using GPT-5 here. I am manually approving the tool call, so if it does want to call a tool, it should prompt me. And this again, is working out of a local directory. And so now it wants to be able to do this read call. Goose has some built-in capabilities, and so some of that is there to see if it's got like a plan or like a local Goose set of rules to follow along. Yeah. The one thing I wish it did was stream the responses, but it does not. While it's thinking about that, we can also take a look at anyway, that Goose model is thinking. So while it's doing that, why don't we take a look at Obot, which is another example of a chat client. And so here we're calling our MCP server integration connectors. And so here, let's add, maybe Google Sheets. And we'll also add DuckDuckGo. And so here I can say, create a new Google Sheet live demo September. And so what this is doing is connecting out to, it's going to argue with me. Just checking. So here I do have Google Sheets added, but none of the tools are available. So that would be why that's not able to do anything. Let's try that again. So this one also doesn't seem to be working. That's weird. Well, while that one's broken, let's still do a Google search, or let's do a search on DuckDuckGo, find all of the recent news about AI and sentiment. So this is now searching, and it should go out and find information. So you can see here it made a tool call about recent news about OpenAI. It was able to get the results. So here, and it's doing a brief sentiment analysis. So overall, the news has been neutral, positive, slightly negative. So you can kind of get like a general sense of what's going on. You can see the raw output here that when it called DuckDuckGo, it got these search results. And so then I can say, maybe I'm more interested in, can you get the whole article from Business Insider and provide highlights. So here it should go and then actually figure out that I meant this article here, and then it's going to get the content of that and give me the key highlights. So what's really nice about this is it gives you the ability to get real information or relevant information into the context so that it can actually stay current and relevant with what you're actually trying to interact with. If we come back to Goose, Goose, you let me down. Yeah, so Goose is, I'm not quite sure what it's up to right now. Let me change models. Can I do OpenAI? See if we can do GPT-4. Let's do GPT-4 one. And so here you can see search for. See if that works a little bit faster. Yeah, there we go. So now it's actually doing the search. I feel like on the last one, it was saying GPT-5 was announced and had some neutral to negative sentiment. I've noticed it is a little bit slower. It seems to want to think a little bit more. So here it's running the search. You should get the details. Here's the query and the maximum number of results it wanted to get. And now it should be processing those results. And we should get something similar in response as we did in our live connection there. Okay. Well, Goose doesn't want to cooperate today. Silly Goose. All right. Let's keep going. So let's talk about bringing MCP into the enterprise. So as you can, we saw being able to have MCP servers get data and information for you and bring that in to your AI workflows really, really helps in the sense that it never hurts to have it go do a bit of research, being able to pull that information, maybe do some lightweight synthesis on, summarizing and what that detail is. But it makes it easier for people to, digest that information and get it, and it just simplifies their workflow so they don't have to necessarily go to multiple sources within the organization or build dashboards to pull that together, and then also then take a look at that dashboard and sort of synthesize it all on their own. Having a bit of AI help there is really good, from being able to make quick decisions and being able to be a bit more productive. And then as you get comfortable with these things and you start automating certain workflows, those processes, the costs in those processes, can drop, and your workforce is empowered to go work on other things within the organization to add value that have not been automated or perhaps don't have integrations with. But basically, once you can give these MCP servers and these tools to your workforce, they'll do really cool and surprising, both in good and bad ways, things with these things to automate their workforce and become more productive. And so it is really kind of an interesting and new way to accomplish tasks and get things done. And I think as things continue to evolve within it, you'll see more native chat application type of experiences and have rich UI elements being brought in. And so being able to largely work with the information that you want without a lot of the cruft and navigation pieces that don't necessarily bring a lot of value to the goal and what you're trying to actually accomplish. And so, but with this great power, there is some challenges that come into play as you bring it into an organization. We're talking about systems that are connecting to your data and your information. So there's certainly security and data governance and compliance concerns. Being able to manage and maintain where that information is going and having that visibility, and do you feel comfortable with that data leaving certain boundaries and being able to kind of get processed by different model providers. There's a lot of new there to think through and work on that. And so the organizations involved are also, there's some new ones, there's some established players that are coming in offering new capabilities. Like you've got OpenAI is relatively new on the block as far as enterprise maturity, but Microsoft, working with them, there's some good capabilities that they bring. And with their enterprise experience, there's a lot of trust. And so you've also got it's a whole new set of technologies, bringing in people that understand it to deploy it securely and safely, and also to actually use it and bring that into the organization as well. So just kind of diving into a couple of those, with MCP servers coming into the organization, there's some new vectors that are somewhat interesting, or that require some additional thought and consideration. So the risk of prompt injection. So you're running these servers, and they potentially, a malicious actor could try and say, in a tool description that's supposed to be, get data from database, it says, dump the whole database and, send it to this anonymous thing. Like, being able to protect yourself against that, or just different people using the same tool in certain circumstances, is privilege being escalated? Has data been sort of pushed that should be isolated, pushed into a similar bucket that anyone can sort of access, and therefore, you're potentially leaking a little bit of information that you wouldn't have wanted to go out that way. The MCP servers today, there's you run each one individually ad hoc, configure them in the end user clients, so there's no centralized control. Being able to control which servers might be on the internet. There's this vector called the rug pull attack, where the server starts up and behaves one way, but then as it's running over time, it sort of changes its behavior. And then there's the traditional software risks. Some of the examples I showed were NPX and UVX. Those particular servers get installed at runtime, and so when they get kicked off, if you didn't have those dependencies or those installed, it would install them. And so each time, while those projects and languages do lock down their dependencies to specific versions, there's the possibility for slight drift. And if something were to have made it into the supply chain, there's the potential that you would get the next install could get a version of something that you weren't entirely confident on. And so being able to, the MCP servers, they introduce, potentially new parties that could view data. You've got your models, your LLM providers that are, processing processing information. So, data that's pulled from one source and sent to the model for processing and then brought back, that flow, being able to understand what that looks like and being able to control that within the organization is definitely something that's important. And also knowing who and what is actually getting at that data and moving it around is also a pretty important part of bringing MCP servers into the organization. And so, excuse me. The spec and this ecosystem is impressive in how fast it is, grown and been adopted. And there's tons and tons of servers that have been developed. Because that spec is evolving, there's a lot of pressure on the developers to keep up with that pace of innovation. There's a lot of, and also due to the tooling and the simplicity in some cases, being able to stand up a purpose-built, MCP server for your own use is certainly a great use case for the capabilities, and it's been embraced. But there's tons and tons of open source MCP servers that are put out there. A lot of them terrible, but they've just been built for one use case, and it may or may not suit your use case or an enterprise use case, and it might not have it was get something done versus thought through from a security, data, and enterprise mindset for delivering those capabilities. And now, as you're bringing in this stuff to the organization, your end users and your admins need to understand how these MCP tools are leveraged, the best way to deliver them. It's a new way to work, being able to quickly pull information from two sources and then have it go to an LLM, get processed and return, quick summarized data and information that you can take action on pretty quickly is, it's exciting and new. In it enables you to automate things that were previously very difficult to automate. You know, at this point, though, it's still a young technology and environment, and so you're very much in this early adopters phase, and so there's likely going to be hiccups, and being able to have that visibility is something that's going to be important for being able to help work through that in a quick and expedient manner. So have there been any questions or anything like that?
Bill, I think you're good to keep going.
Cool, thanks. Yeah, let's cover the MCP gateway architecture. So the idea that you would want to centralize and administer a sort of the AI delivery within an organization comes down to several key components. And so being able to offer access to models and the ability to interact with that, whether it's going to be through agents or your tools like Cursor, VS Code, or just a chat interface. Those all you're going to want to route those through like an LLM gateway, and as an organization, you're going to want to use either best of breed. You're going to want to manage costs. You're going to want to put guardrails and see what data is leaving your organization to go to these models for processing. And so that all falls into this LLM gateway bucket. And so with that, you get that visibility at that layer. Then the MCP gateway is also providing similar functionality at the MCP layer, where you're looking at individual tool calls, who's getting which resources are going back and forth, what information and what services are getting plugged into. And you connect that with an MCP catalog that's potentially a curated list of MCP servers that you feel comfortable connecting to your systems, your data within that organization. And so being able to curate that and then making it simple and easy for your end users to get that information and install that capability, those tools, and leverage them, through the gateway is very, very powerful, and definitely necessary to sort of keep, controls on what's being accessed within your organization. So I think a demo is a good way to kind of walk through and see what we're talking about when it comes to a gateway. Like I said, we'll be using the Obot gateway. And so here you're looking at the main Obot enterprise MCP gateway. And then the first things you do is configure your auth providers. And what this is doing is configuring your gateway so that only members of your identity provider, your organization that can log into other systems, your SSO, can use the MCP gateway and access the system. And so every connection that comes into the MCP gateway will be authenticated against one of these providers, which is the first level of authentication and authorization. And then as an admin, you're going to curate that catalog of MCP servers. And you're going to see, here's the overall list of servers that would be available in this organization. And you can add individual ones. The gateway, we're looking at it in a couple different ways. There's the single user server experience, which is you're going to deploy an MCP server per user. They're going to give it like an API key that belongs to them, or like a personal access token. And so each individual user that is going to want to use that service would get their own. Then there's the multi-user server story, which is, if the addresses two use cases. One is the company's got a weather API key that everyone who wants weather in a chat service can just use. So that would be configured once and then used by many people. The other use case for this is you're going to configure it to authenticate upstream with another source, and it handles the tenancy within itself. And then there's the remote servers, which are endpoints that are hosted in your organization or remotely by a third party. Like if Atlassian is an example of a remote server from a third party that you would want to leverage, or if you're deploying your own MCP servers through your own CI/CD pipelines and exposing those as streamable HTTP endpoints, those would connect here. And again, the way that you add servers looks very similar to what we saw in Goose in the first demo. So you have your MPX, UVX, and containerized. We're leaning towards the containerized view of running MCP servers outside of development, because of all the benefits that we've seen in applications, by containerizing our applications and deploying those on systems like Kubernetes, you can leverage that here with MCP, addressing a lot of the concerns that are addressed by software delivery through containers. And then here, if you're also using the LLM, the chat capability, you would configure your model providers. You would provide your API keys. You would set default models. Again, you can control which model is used by default, and which you can also control, which models are available to your end users. So when they are chatting, they can select from different different models for different needs. You can kind of alias these as well, so that they're just using the default model, but you can change that between different providers depending on costs or anything like that. You can see different chat threads and who is chatting. You can see the different tasks, and so those are lightweight automations that you can leverage to run periodically and accomplish things for you. You can see the outputs of those task runs over time. And then here you can also, with your MCP servers, create your access groups. And so here what you're doing is you have your main catalog, but then you can create sort of views within that. So you can say like marketing, for instance, and you could select the users or the groups that would have access to this. And then you could select specifically the MCP servers that they are going to need. So they'll probably need email, they're going to need Notion, HubSpot, and then so then you can confirm that. So now when members of the marketing team log in, they would see these servers, but they wouldn't necessarily see like context 7 for developers. And so when a logged in user comes in, they get this My Connector view. And so here they can see all of the MCP servers that they have access to. I'm an administrator on the system, so I can see everything in the catalog. And then if they want to connect to just one of these servers, they can get the connection string, and then they can drop this into one of their clients that they're using locally, or they can generate a configuration with all the MCP servers that they've got configured. And this would then, you drop this, you just copy and paste this content into, like Claude or VS Code, and then you can start using those immediately. You can control those, what tools are available once you add the server to your client. And then most clients provide the ability to add and remove or enable, disable tools when you're chatting, so that you can kind of keep the model somewhat focused. Also within this, you can connect, and you can just immediately, your users can chat with it using the essence of Firecrawl is, search for latest AI news. So here now I'm able to try out the Firecrawl MCP server and get at that information and that data. And so while it's chatting, the other cool thing that's being done here is as I'm chatting, the gateway is adding is performing audit logs. So every tool call, every tool list, everything that's going to that MCP server is being logged, and so you can see the request that was made, get at the information, and so you would have this visibility to go back and see who did what when, or if you had an autonomous agent, you would see that as well, and you can see that this agent went and called this tool, got this data, and so if you had to go back and sort of reconstruct what an agent did, that would be possible. The other piece of information you can get is the overall usage within the platform, and so you can see which tools are being used most frequently, how long those are taking, and if there's any lag, any errors going by, and the most active users. Another capability that's very powerful is the filtering capability. So here, what you can do is stand up a program that's an endpoint that's going to receive a webhook. And in that webhook, you'll get the full payload of what's going to the MCP server. And so you can programmatically inspect that and accept or reject that tool call request. If you don't like the information that's going out through the tool call, you can reject it. If you don't want the response from the tool coming, going back out to the end user, you can also reject that. And so these webhook receivers that you build can do whatever you need them to do. So they can, look at it through basic programming. You can run it back through an LLM or another model that's, inspecting it for content or, malicious instructions, something like that. Just to make sure that your data, you have flexibility to control how your data is going to be used within these MCP servers. These MCP servers, so the Obot gateway is also deploying and managing those for you. And so in the background, you can see the different servers that have been deployed. You get the basic information. I apologize, our system was working earlier. Look at the DuckDuckGo one, you can see, get the server details here. You can see that there's a newer version of the MCP server available, and it's asking me, should I go and update this? You can see the logs of that server. If you needed to restart that instance, that would also be possible. You can see who's deployed it, and then you can drill down into specifics of the which groups, which teams have access to it, which here's the audit log specifically for this MCP server, the usage, which tool calls and who are the most frequent users. You get all of that visibility. You can see how it's configured and the different tools that are available within that. Yeah, so that's Obot, the MCP gateway. And do we have any questions that came out of that one?
I think you're good to keep going, Bill.
Cool. So yeah, that was the Obot gateway and a walkthrough for that. If you want more information on MCP, the main website for Model Context Protocol, there are developer summits and live streams that you can check out. The next developer summit is in London in October, where you can deep dive with the whole community on what's coming up and how to accomplish and get really great information on the protocol. So thank you. Appreciate everyone's time today. You can follow us on YouTube, where this recording will end up, and also on X.